This is lecture 7C. Now, in the first part, we talked about the empires of India and Jainism. Second part, I talked about Buddhism. Now I'm going to turn to the third major Indian religion to come out of the classical era, and that's Hinduism. Now, Hinduism emerged more gradually than Buddhism and Jainism because both of those they can point to a founding figure, right? Vardhamana Mahavira or Siddhartha Gautama. But Hinduism instead emerged gradually. I talked about the Vedic religion, which was developed, well before 500 BCE, and then beginning about 800 BCE with the Upanishads, you started to see that religion shift away from sort of priestly rituals and things and towards personal morality and salvation. And so Hinduism emerges out of that gradually, and partly Hinduism emerges in tension with Buddhism because Buddhism becomes this popular religion, and Hinduism is in a sense put up as a rival religion against Buddhism. But we know that Hinduism really emerges between 300 BCE, which is when the Bhagavad Gita was probably written, and then up to 400 CE. So it emerges gradually over centuries. And there's lots of writings that contribute to the formulation of Hinduism. So Hinduism is a much more gradual religion. It doesn't have a founding figure the way that Buddhism or Jainism does. Now, Hinduism is similar to Buddhism and Jainism, and it has this idea of samsara, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. It argues that everybody's soul is born over and over again in life, and that life is suffering and life kind of sucks. And so the idea is that you want to achieve moksha, which is release from the cycle of samsara. And so moksha it allows your soul to go and in this case in Hinduism go and join Brahman, who is the universal God, and so you're not born anymore. But so Hinduism is very similar to Buddhism and Jainism in that it's trying to find the path to allow your soul to escape the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. So far, so good. But Hinduism is very different from Buddhism and Jainism because Buddhism and Jainism said that everybody was fundamentally equal, that any person in any lifetime could achieve nirvana or moksha, right? Hinduism does not say that. Instead, Hinduism becomes closely tied up with the idea of caste. Now, I talked in an earlier lecture on India about how this caste system develops. And the caste system, there are castes, each caste is sort of associated with a type of occupation. At the top, you have the Brahmins, who are priests, and then you have the Kshatriyas, who are warriors and government officials, and then you have the Vaishyas, who are the merchants, and artisans, and then you have the Shudras, who are the peasants. And then at the bottom, you have the untouchables, who aren't technically a caste, but they act like a caste. And so the key trick here is that in Hinduism, the argument goes that when you die, you have a karmic burden, just like they said in Buddhism or in Jainism, that you have a karmic burden based on how well you've lived your life. And that determines how you come back in the next life. But in Hinduism, this is directly connected to caste. So basically the idea is that if you live your life well, when you die, you will come back in a higher caste. And if you live your life badly, you'll come back in a lower caste. And so in Hinduism, your caste sort of determines where you are on the path to enlightenment or achieving moksha. That your caste is sort of a marker, a signal where you are, because the closer you are to enlightenment and moksha, the higher caste you're going to be, right? And so the assumption is that, maybe you start life as an untouchable. Maybe your first life you're an untouchable. And if you do everything right then and you gain a little bit of wisdom, you'll come back as a Shudra, the next higher caste in the next life. And maybe you'll come back 3 or 4 or 5 lives as a Shudra, but you achieve some modicum of enlightenment then, and then you come back as Vaishya. And so for several lifetimes, or maybe dozens or hundreds or thousands of lifetimes, you're a Vaishya, and then you'll come. But if you do that right, eventually you'll come back as a Kshatriya, and then maybe you're a Kshatriya for 1 or 5 or 10 or 2,000 lifetimes, and then you will, when you gain enough enlightenment there, you'll come back as a Brahmin, and then maybe it's 1 or 5 or 10 or 1,000 lifetimes, and you'll finally achieve moksha, right? So the big difference with Hinduism compared to Buddhism or Jainism is that social class is directly connected to the sort of metaphysical process of salvation, right? If you're in the Shudra class, you know you have multiple lifetimes ahead of you before you can achieve moksha, because you have to have at least one lifetime coming back in every caste above you. Now, what's interesting, I mean, just as Buddhism had the eightfold path, in Hinduism they talk about a fourfold path, right? Much simpler, right? And so this is the four parts of salvation. The first part is dharma. And dharma means a couple things. One is it means law, and one is it means sort of your role in society, and one it means your duty also. And so what dharma is that each social caste is thought to have a particular set of duties for that caste. And you'll see this in the Bhagavad Gita, that Arjuna, the main character there, he's a kshatriya, and so Krishna the god tells him, your duty, your dharma, is to fight. That's what your job is, right, for your caste. And so, but it's not just your job. It's also a whole series of ways you're supposed to act to be a good member of that caste. And so you're supposed to only marry the right people from your caste, and you're supposed to, each caste has different requirements for how much ritual purity they're supposed to have, and foods they can eat, and things like that, and ways they can act. And so dharma is this whole sort of set of rules about life, right? And it's different for each caste, that the Brahmins have one dharma and Kshatriyas have a different one. And it's different for different genders also, that women have a slightly different dharma in each caste than the men do. So dharma is the sort of the rules and regulations of how you're supposed to live your life, the moral code for how you're supposed to live your life based on your caste and your gender and your position in life, right? You have different duties as a child than you do as an old person, than you do as a parent in the prime of life, etc. So dharma shifts over the course of your lifetime. Your dharma shifts, and dharma is different for different castes and different genders. So dharma is this sort of large sense of the rules for how to live your life, and this is, don't take this too far, but it can be loosely compared to the Confucian idea that there are different, how you live your life is based on your gender and your class and your age, etc., like that, right? So the first is dharma, which is that you do the duties of your caste and your age and your gender, etc. The second path is artha, which is the sort of pursuit of wealth and prosperity, that you're supposed to work hard, basically. But you're supposed to work hard in an honest way. You're supposed to make an honest living. You're not supposed to get rich by screwing people over or robbing people or murdering or anything like that. Artha is learning how to fulfill your role in society to become prosperous. So you're supposed to strive for prosperity. You're supposed to strive to have lots of children. You're supposed to strive to have a good house, build a good business, whatever. And this is connected to your dharma, right, also. The third is kama, and that means enjoyment. And so basically the idea of kama is that you should always you should strive to find contentment in life by having a balance of pleasure and work and things like that. And in particular, you should learn how to truly enjoy relationships, and you should learn how to enjoy nature, and you should learn how to enjoy, sex. I mean, the Kama Sutra is the Kama of sex, right? And so Kama is this idea that you have to sort of enjoy things in moderation and do them well, right? So that's the third part. And if you do those three things, the idea is that you will fulfill your job well in a lifetime, and when you come back, you'll be in a higher caste next lifetime, right? And so ultimately, you can achieve moksha if you do your dharma, artha, and kama diligently. But there's one other aspect of Hinduism which is kind of interesting, which is yogas. Now, in the United States, we think of yoga and we think of, a bunch of poses and stretching and physical activity. But there's actually, yoga just means a discipline. And so in Hinduism, there are lots of yogas which can help you move along the fourfold path. They can help you to realize things about your place in the world and to help you discipline your soul and work off your karmic burden and get closer to moksha. And so there's really multiple forms of yoga that take different that are different paths to sort of work on enlightenment. So one is jnana yoga, and these names are all in the notes on the course website. One is jnana yoga, which is how one learns to sort of reject your physical body by seeing beyond yourself. And this involves meditation and philosophy and all sorts of things like this, and study. But it's basically learning how to see that everything is all interconnected, that the whole universe is like a well-regulated machine, and every part has to do its bit in order for the machine to run smoothly. And so the more you can understand how everything is interconnected and everything is dependent on everything else in the web of life, the more you will realize how important it is for each person to do their dharma, to fulfill their role in life. And so jnana yoga is sort of a search for enlightenment through study and through meditation on this. Bhakti yoga is much more of what we might call an ecstatic discipline. It's about trying to use meditation to achieve a sort of a transcendent state, a mystical state, where you can suddenly sort of understand how be in touch with the universe, and connect with the gods. And so Bhakti yoga is much more about putting yourself in an altered mental state through different disciplinary practices, and it's kind of mystical, right? You're going to have a spiritual awakening, an epiphany, if you will. And then there's karma yoga, which is basically the idea that you're going to discipline yourself by making yourself serve others, that you're going to learn about life and the connectedness of everything by serving others. And so karma yoga is all about throwing yourself into service to others through charity work or through teaching or what have you. And the idea is that you are gaining enlightenment by empathizing with others, by serving them, and you are seeing your own place in you're seeing your own place in the world, and in some ways learning that you don't really matter as an individual that much by serving others. Right? And then the final is Raja yoga, which is what we think of as yoga. This is where, and the idea here is that in Raja yoga is that you're going to use meditation and bodily discipline to create a sense of stillness, so that you can open yourself up to the universe and really understand it that way. And so you do these things that we call yoga, these stretches and poses and things like that, to channel your energy through your body and to get in touch with how your body is connected to the universe in order to really get in tune with the overall universe. And so one of the key ideas here in Hinduism is that the whole universe is a intricately connected system. And each individual has a tendency to think of themselves as all alone, and they just care about themselves, and that's bad. And you're going to do things that increase your karmic burden in life, and you're going to go down in the caste system. So what you have to do instead is you have to do various ways of realizing, gaining the enlightenment that we really are all connected. We're all part of the same web or the same machine, and we all have to do our jobs. We all are cogs in the machine who have to do our jobs as they're assigned. And that's why Dharma is so important, because Dharma is basically saying, if this is the job you've been assigned, this is the job you have to do. Right? And you have to learn how to see yourself as just one part of a larger machine, and your job is important, so do that job. Right? And this becomes a really key part of the Bhagavad Gita. This is a key part of what Krishna tells Arjuna, is one of the most important things you've got to do is you've got to say, I'm going to do my job, right? I'm going to do my job because I recognize that everybody has to do their job for society to run correctly, for the world, the universe to keep running correctly. So I have to do that, right? Now, Hinduism, unlike Buddhism and Jainism, has a number of deities, right? In Hinduism, there's the sort of universal deity is called Brahman. And Brahman is the sort of the life force of the whole universe, the ordering force of the whole universe. And I should point out, Brahman with an A is the god, and Brahman with an I is the caste. But Brahman, as the sort of universal deity and life force of the universe, can actually manifest himself as specific gods. He can sort of take on a particular persona or a particular existence. And these are called avatars. And so Brahman has three main avatars, three main forms he takes, or three main sides of his personality, almost, if you will. The first is Shiva, who is seen as a god, but as a god who's an avatar of Brahman. Shiva is the destroyer, and Shiva is death and destruction, and Shiva is necessary in the world because everything must come to an end. That's part of how the universe works. So Shiva is the destroyer. Devi is the creator, the goddess of fertility, the goddess of creation. And so Devi is about creation. So Shiva and Devi are sort of two sides of the same coin, creation and destruction. You have to have destruction to allow for later creation. You have to have death to allow for birth, etc. And then there's Vishnu, who is the preserver, right? Vishnu is the one that keeps everything going amidst all this destruction and birth and death, etc. And so the three of them they're three aspects of Brahman. They're three avatars of Brahman, but they are the three main gods in the Hindu pantheon. Now, even those gods, Shiva and Devi and Vishnu, can have their own avatars. And Krishna, who is a god in the Bhagavad Gita, is actually an avatar of Vishnu, the preserver. And that's why Krishna is explaining to Arjuna how the whole universe works and how every part has to do their job in the whole universe. He's trying to teach Arjuna how to preserve the functioning of the universe, right? And so Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu, and there are lots of other Hindu deities who are seen as avatars of Shiva or Devi or Vishnu, right? And what's kind of interesting about Hinduism is that Hinduism actually becomes it can kind of absorb other religions. For instance, when Buddha comes along, Hindus argue that Buddha was actually an avatar of, I believe it was Vishnu, but don't quote me on that. He was explaining, he was bringing divine wisdom to human beings. And when Christianity shows up in India, Hindus argue that Jesus is actually also an avatar. Right? He's merely bringing the same message that's in Hinduism in another form, right? And so they can sort of absorb other religions. And in fact, in Hinduism, there are because there are multiple deities, there are multiple temples, and it's almost like it's multiple religions that you can sort of pick a deity that you're going to worship, and like Krishna, and you can develop a whole series of practices and rituals to help you worship Krishna or Vishnu or Devi or whatever. And so Hinduism is this very multifaceted religion with all these sort of different rituals, and because it's so focused on caste, it's got all these different ways that different castes are supposed to practice the religion. And so, a Shudra is going to practice the religion, worship Krishna differently than a Brahmin would. And so Hinduism is this really multifaceted religion, but one of the things that we need to look at and keep track of is that Hinduism, in many ways, becomes a much better religion for maintaining social stability. And I'm not going to talk about that here, but I want you to think about that. And in the discussion, I'm going to talk about social stability and religions, and I want you to be thinking about what is it about a religion that creates social stability, and why would Hinduism be a good one at that? So we'll think about that, and that's it for Lecture 7.